going to tell you about the great adventurer and explorer, Alexander von Humboldt. I just finished reading a book called The Invention of Nature, Alexander von Humboldt's New World. And the reason I dug into learning about Humboldt is that there is a statue of him in the park next to my house. And I had passed by this statue many times, never looking at the plaque. And I saw the back of the plaque first, the back of the statue, and it said, "This is dedicated to the world's best traveler of this era or any other era." And I thought, wow, I should find out who that is. So I walked around to the front, Alexander von Humboldt. And I was like, oh, interesting. And the statue was erected by Henry Shaw, who is the founder of the Missouri Botanical Garden. And I thought, why is the founder of the Botanical Garden putting up, well, this was back in the 1870s. Why did he erect this huge statue to this traveler? So I found this amazing book, this biography of von Humboldt by Andrea Wolf. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I learned about this fascinating man. And people called him the most famous scientist in the world. His fame was equal to Napoleon Bonaparte. They were the most famous people of their day, early 1800s. So let's learn a little bit about what made von Humboldt so famous. So von Humboldt was sort of royalty. He was a Prussian, so German, and grew up in, his uncle was the king of Prussia, and his dad was a member of the court, and so he was sort of expected to participate in the state. And ultimately, eventually, his salary was paid by the king for a long, long time, which he used to do his research. But as a kid, he was sort of forced into this trying to be something he wasn't. What he really wanted to be was just studying nature. And I think it's so, when you can see someone that ultimately becomes a great success, a great influence on the world, and you can see that they're just living out the way that they always were as a kid, exploring, discovering. He had always dreamed of travel, and eventually his parents died, and he inherited this sum of money. And he had been trained as a mining inspector. So he had already traveled around Germany and was already starting to use his work. And he was, in his early 20s at the time. He sort of was observing the natural world and geography and botany and things while he was going out and sort of exploring and monitoring these German mines. But so he got this inheritance and he said, okay, I'm off. I'm doing what I've always wanted to do, going to South America. And he planned this expedition for a year, and he spent more than 5 years in South America. He was the first person to sort of fully explore up and down the Andes, in the rainforest, Central and South America. And he took another botanist with him, and he had some helpers that came along this expedition. And he was climbing volcanoes. He was the first person to climb above 20,000 feet. He was bringing barometers and sextants and all these other instruments with him. So he was meticulously observing everything, all the plants. They collected tens of thousands of species that he, once he returned, he spent years sort of writing books about all these things. So he was observing nature in a way that nobody had observed before. And he was making connections because he was trained in geology and because he had spent time with the poet Goethe. And so he was writing poetically about these things, and he had a botanist with him, and he was looking from the big picture at nature for the first time ever. So he's the one that came up with the ideas of sort of the web of life and ecology and how there's different climate regions. And he came up with ideas like plate tectonics. And ultimately this trip, the South Africa trip, led to his body of work in the sciences that influenced people like Charles Darwin, who ultimately came up with the theory of evolution, people like John Muir, Henry David Thoreau, so many people that would bring together, the arts and creativity and nature and science and exploration and all these things. And, von Humboldt, he rubbed shoulders with so many famous people. He He hung out with Thomas Jefferson. He stopped by and visited the president and told him everything he had learned about South America. That was basically the same year that Lewis and Clark set off on their expedition. Humboldt was coming through the United States to talk to Jefferson. And when he finally came back to Europe, first he was in London, I believe, and then he spent many decades living in Paris, which was sort of the center of scientific discourse, of free thinking of that day, largely because of the revolutions. And he was friends with all, the famous chemists and the famous scientists of the day. And this was kind of before science became siloed, before it sort of broke up into many disciplines. And so Humboldt was perhaps, one of these sort of Renaissance men, these polymaths, and he ended up writing 30, 40, 50 books. I don't know, but there were some that were so widely read and renowned across Europe and the Americas. Like this, if you wanted to have one book, you would buy von Humboldt's book. But he knew that he needed to go exploring again. He knew that he needed more information. He wanted to sort of see the world and understand the Earth as a planet and all the sort of the systems, the ecological systems in it. And so he was really trying to get to the Himalaya to compare them to the Andes and see, what happened at different elevations and with their geology. And the British East India Company just wasn't having it because partly Humboldt was outspoken against slavery and against things that the East India Company was doing in India, really oppressing people. And so he never got to go to India. He never got to go to the Himalaya. But eventually, when he was older, I think he was maybe by his 50s. So he'd been living in Paris for decades. And finally, he got an invitation from the Tsar of Russia to, use his mining expertise and sort of go and look at their mines to see, or they're mining for gold, they're mining for diamonds, silver, copper, things like that. And so he had a scientific expedition financed by the Tsar. And so he had to look at these mines, but he also had sort of free reign to make observations as he went and explore. And he went all the way across from Moscow, all the way over to the border with China and Mongolia, and met, Chinese and Mongolian officials, and sort of climbed the mountains and observed the different natural ecosystems along the way across Russia. And so he sort of combined the knowledge that he gained, the perspective from this Russian expedition with his big South American expedition. And he wrote this book called Cosmos, where he was looking at everything we knew about sciences, from microbiology to atoms, working from the very smallest to the ecosystem level up to astronomy and sort of the universal level. And these were all sort of beautifully illustrated. And what we sort of don't realize, and why I had never heard of Humboldt, I just had no concept that he had sort of done so much to lay the foundations of how we think about the natural world. The book is called The Invention of Nature because really he was the first one to tie so many of these ideas. He was a global thinker. He was a big picture thinker in a way that nobody ever was before. And because these ideas are just so commonly accepted by us now in 2020, we don't necessarily credit him with these ideas. They're just sort of facts that we all accept. But it was so cool that, he's the first person to do this exploration. And because he's such a detailed observer, and because of the way his mind works, he can piece together an observation of plants he's seen in the Alps and the Andes and the Caucasus Mountains, and really understand what's going on in different places of the earth, and how, wow, here's a plant that I saw in Africa that looks exactly like a plant in South America. Oh, were South America and Africa, did they used to be connected? And, he would create all these interesting theories, which eventually became proven because he was such a global thinker. So I'm just really impressed that, one, he was able to create this body of work, and I really identify with him as a person. They said that he would get so excited talking about something that nobody could get a word in edgewise, and they said, Humboldt's the most amazing man, and he would captivate audiences from the royal courts to scientific lectures, and anyone that would talk to him, he was just like pouring forth ideas and making all these connections, just kind of working at a frantic pace for decades. So impressive. And it's just because he was so excited about what he was learning and exploring. And it just such a pure, like you could see it as a child. And he went on to live this life of exploration and adventure and connecting ideas. And personally, I really feel connected with him, even though he was, born more than 100 years. He died 100 years before I was born. So highly recommend the book, The Invention of Nature by Andrea Wolf. And I'm thinking I'll bring a few more of these explorer adventurer biographies. Some folks that are no longer with us from past centuries. Anyone from Magellan to the polar explorers. I think these are fascinating people, and I've read almost every adventure book you can think of. The top 100 list published by National Geographic, I probably read 75 of them. So if next time I pick up a good adventure story, I'll bring you another summary. But so that's the story of Alexander von Humboldt, the German explorer who shaped how we think today, and you might not even know it. All right, thank you so much for listening. Now it's your turn to go out there and be adventurous and discover something.